Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you catch this. I'm gonna possibly talk a little bit longer than I've been talking, past the 30-minute threshold or 20-minute threshold, wherever it is. We'll see. I'm not gonna give you all the information because it's gonna get pretty lengthy, but I'm gonna read you some things that I pulled from historical documents, records, and books and encyclopedias. Because when I try to share things, I don't want to give you half information. I do prefer if you go do some research on your own because there's no way I could just give you everything that I've studied. And what I've also found is when you do your own study, the information has more value to you as the learner. So I'm going to read you a few things somewhere in this talk and give you a few scriptures. But I just want to talk about a subject that's been pushed on us for many years. But the sad thing is, we don't know how long the subject has actually been pushed on society. It goes back much further than most people in this country know about. Because someone I respect greatly made a post on social media talking about the Holocaust. And she was upset because other school teachers, she's a former school teacher, she was upset with some other school teachers want to change the curriculum and the narrative surrounding the Holocaust. And, you know, if she did a little bit more research herself, she might take the same position as these teachers who came out publicly and said they wanted to do this. And, I commented because we've always been cordial. And I said, I understand why those teachers are questioning the history. And I also said, I've studied it. And there are some different things that need to be told and taught. And her response to me was that if anyone tries to deny it, she will unfriend them because she's heard the witness accounts and everything else surrounding it, and she doesn't play about that. And so I responded to her and I told her, you know, I don't deny it. I said, but I'll just leave it right there because I respect you too much. And, in saying that, I might need to think about the people I respect because I won't unfriend anyone on social media for having a different thought process or a different opinion than me. But something like that can only come with maturity. It doesn't come with age, it doesn't come with color, it doesn't come with income, and it definitely doesn't come with educational background because education to now is totally indoctrinating all the children. And this person also thinks Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a great woman. Well, Ginsburg hated black folks. So well, let me leave that alone. But that's where we are as a society. We've been eating lies for so long that if anyone comes along and tries to feed us something different, we would rather keep eating the same old thing. I've never denied that the situation didn't happen. I've just said that after reading their own books and encyclopedias that the number was grossly overstated. Now that's according to them. That's not according to me. Now, if you really want your illusions that you were taught shattered on this subject, pick up Arthur Kessler's book, The 13th Tribe. Pick up Benjamin Friedman's book, Facts Are Facts. Pick up Shlomo Sand's book. What's that? The Origination or Making of a Jew or something like that. I'm drawing a blank on Shlomo's book, the name. Pick up Ben Klassen's book, White Man's Bible, if you really want to know. But I know most people won't do it for just that reason. They don't want to know. They prefer to believe in a lie. just like I had believed it for years. You know why I believed it? Because preachers were preaching it and teachers were teaching it. And there were no other voices who had done enough research that I had access to at the time to know any better. And right today, those same industries are teaching it, and they've taught it so well that many in society get bent all out of shape if you can destroy what they believe. I mean, I've been called a whole lot of things just because I proposed something different than what the school system and the preachers taught. I mean, I can't even repeat some of the names I was called. And in the process, I just laugh at the people and I keep on going. And so people get so bent out of shape in this society today if you can destroy what they believe. And I'm going to be honest with you. Anything that can be destroyed by the truth deserves to be destroyed by the truth. I didn't even give you any of the names of the black authors that wrote books who've actually researched and studied this stuff a lot more extensively than me. And the reason I didn't give them was because if I gave you all accounts researched by black Hebrews, you would easily try to dismiss it because you said that's only from the black perspective. But ironically, the people of the 6 million are the same ones who promote their own narrative and everybody believes it. It's amazing how that works. There's so much sympathy for these folks that it's sickening. Now, I personally believe any type of wrongdoing needs to be eliminated against any people. It doesn't matter what your color, what your background is, any people. Now, if you of that type of person that's just wrapped up in evil and you serve your father, Satan, I don't feel sorry for you. I'm just be honest with you. But I'm of also the mindset that every group of people gets sympathy in this country except for the true Hebrews or Israelites, depending on who you want to call them. Not Hebrew Israelites, Hebrews or Israelites, depending on who you want to call them, which are the real descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Folks from every race and culture love to throw around 6 million, even black folks. I should tell you, though, that the black apologists are also being paid by these same folks to push their narrative onto other black folks. They're trying to force it on us. I mean, how can you do all of this, finding your roots and hiding colors, and never mention a group of people who owned most of the slaves and ran the slave trade? Just doesn't make sense unless, well, you know. Find yourself a map of the mayors of all the southern cities during slavery in the United States or the 13 colonies or whatever you want to call it, and see who the mayors were. Find yourself a map or list of the major cotton dealers in the South and come back and holler at me. We've been given the millions of slaves who did make it to the shores of America. But did you realize that 9 out of every 10 slaves who were captured never made it here? They died on the journey or they jumped overboard in the process of the journey. So let's go with the 4 million figure that they've tried to sell us on. Don't feel sympathy for the 4 million, but make sure to feel sympathy for the 6 million. You know why the 6 was the number chosen? Because it gave them a larger number just in case history were to pull out a few stragglers that they had previously missed. So if only 10% of the people captured off the shores made it, only 10% made it to the shores of America, that's North and South, that means 36 million were stolen or captured. So that number is still 6 times greater than the 6 million we've been taught to feel sympathy for. During the time when George Washington was president, a Jewish guy named Moses Sexia actually approached Washington to talk about the freedom for the descendants of Abraham. And Washington, being just as ignorant as many people are today, believed they were Abraham's descendants, and he agreed to allow them freedom after the Revolutionary War had ended. But amazingly, Washington never made sure that the true descendants of Abraham um, remain. He wanted to make sure that the true descendants of Abraham remain bound. Sorry about that. Get mixed up. My brain started running faster than my mouth sometimes. So Moses Sexia wasn't concerned about freedom from a bondage standpoint because they weren't slaves. The freedom Sexia wanted was to be able to plunder and gain wealth. And the blacks that were bought off the slave coast of Africa were purchased for between $40 and $50 each. And then they were sold on the shores of America for about $2,000 per head. That's how they started building their wealth. And you should know they've been kicked out 138 countries around the world historically. Look at the return on that. Now, if my math is correct, that's a 5,000% return on investment. What they call it a ROI. 5,000%. And while you Negroes running around getting tattoos, you need to know it was the people who enslaved you that made tattooing popular by branding their slaves on their hip or their back, so if they ran away, other slaveholders would know which Jew they belonged to, and they could return him or her to that owner. They also shave your heads bald. On the voyages, the men were put in one part of the ship. The women were put in another part of the ship, where the captain and the crew had easy access to them so they could rape them whenever they felt like it. And the children were put on the deck. The children were left on the deck of the ship. So if the crew and the captain are raping all of these women, where do you think your first mulattoes came from? Those so-called civilized folks who call us uncivilized folks were raping the women, they were raping the men, and they were raping the children. But the only evidence of rape was the pregnancies of the women. Now, even when it rained, they left the children on the deck and they would just cover them up with some type of cloth because they didn't care to protect them. And whatever they lost was considered just that, a loss. When many of the women ended up pregnant, they knew they had a new breed of slaves that would be born, so they didn't really care about the ones that they lost on the voyage from illness. This 6 million number gets thrown around so much that most people around the world actually believe it. As a matter of fact, the 6 million figure was first thrown around starting in the year 1850. 1850. It has been thrown around since the year 1850. But history will tell you that the figure didn't come around until World War II. Now, amazingly, if you study history, you'll see that in the year 1854, the Republican Party was actually formed as the Anti-Slavery Party. And since most of the people who owned slaves were of the 6 million origin, it should be clear. They knew they were getting ready to lose all of that free slave labor, so they had to come up with a new hustle that would provide them sympathy and finances for the rest of their existence and the existence of their descendants. So 1850, 1854, because you have to understand, and I'm going to get into some of that other stuff too, but there have been several parties trying to form before then, it just didn't last. So the year after word got to Texas that slavery had ended in 1865 because the proclamation was signed in 1863. And for whatever reason, it took 2 years to get down here to Texas on the shores of Galveston. You figure that one out, you could have probably rode your horse faster than that. But the very next year in 1866, the number 6 million appeared again in a Christian publication. And that's how they captured the mind of Christian folks. And all they did in that article was repeat the number from 1850. And then in the years 1869, I believe in the month of September, um, they repeated them in some called the Sunday Notes. I think that was in a Christian newspaper too. October, the very next month, 1869, they repeated that number again in something called um, religious intelligence. I guess I should have brought more notes than the ones I'm gonna read out later, so I could just remember this stuff off the top of my head. But it's just a lot of stuff to take in, and so I try to go from memory on some of this stuff, and that's why I've been reading a few things to you as of late, because it's just the brain can hold a lot of things, but when you come across and you're studying so much stuff, sometimes that stuff starts running together, and you can kind of get it all mixed up. So about 20 years later, around 1889, they repeated the number 6 million again. Like I said, the number started in 1850. But the difference what happened in 1889 was somebody asked the question. Excuse me. The question was asked, how many Jews are there? Because they keep repeating the same number. I mean, finally somebody asked the question. The New York Times would actually come out and reiterate the number, I believe, in January of 1891. And like I said, I got some notes. I'm going to pull them up later as I start going through this stuff. And so I believe New York Times came out in 1891. And that in the year 1891 alone, from September to December, they actually released 15 articles promoting the six. And they kind of let it die down a little bit. Then it came back around in 1896, 1897. And when it came back around in 1897, that was a guy named Theodore Herzl. I'm guessing Theodore was spelled differently back then, because when I read it, there was no E on the end of Theodore, but it's still Theodore Herzl, Herzl. I can remember that. That's easy to remember. But he wrote a book titled, well, translated to English, The Jewish State. Guess what number was in the book? Did you say 6? Like I said, that was 1897. October 1904, the Jews actually started pushing for their own homeland. Amazingly. Like I said, they've been kicked out of 138 countries already. And check the history yourself. You don't take my word for nothing. I always tell you that. Don't take my word for anything. And so we don't understand why Israel is what they want to call home now. Because, see, they want to be called God's chosen. They want to be referenced as God's chosen. But the place, the original target for asking for a homeland was actually South Africa. But that didn't kind of work out for their plan, so they eventually settled on somewhere in East Africa. Amazing, ain't it? What colony is in East Africa? Although they call it the Middle East now? Israel. Yeah, Israel's still part of Africa right today, even though they built the Suez Canal to try and separate Africa from itself. Israel still shares the same tectonic plate with Africa because it's still part of Africa. I don't care what your history books and encyclopedias and historians try to tell you. Even your pastors get up in the pulpit and talk about the Middle East way back when Christ walked the earth. Well, Christ couldn't walk into Egypt from Israel over the Suez Canal. Moses couldn't go across the Suez Canal into Egypt from Israel. So it wasn't no Middle East back then. The Middle East didn't come until, guess what time? The late 1800s. When did I tell you the 6 million started? Middle of the 1800s. So y'all got to understand, these folks they put their plans in the works long time ahead of schedule. So they wanted Africa. And if you look historically, they've been plundering Africa their entire existence. They're still plundering Africa. Now they've turned it over to some Chinese folks to let them do it. So when they were actually seeking a homeland, guess what they said? We're seeking a homeland for the suppression of the 6 million Jews in Russia. Why Russia? Why would they end Russia? Because Russia was actually their home, a place called Khazaria. The New York Times reported again in the year 1905 the number 6 million. And so let me pull up some of these notes so I can move on a little bit faster, because I think I'm going a little too slow for myself, because like I said, I'm trying to search. Give me a second. All right, here we go. In November 1905, an article came out saying from 1890 to 1902, 6 million were expelled from Russia. On March 25th, 1906, the newspapers reported on the startling conditions of the 6 million. In March and April 1910, the 6 million was repeated on October 31st, 1911. 1911, 6 million, March and April 1910, 6 million also. And the article on October 31st, 1911, came out saying Christian churches plead for the Jews. New York Times reports in the middle column of that same article about a resolution passed where it was read that the 6 million Jews of Russia are singled out for systematic oppression and for the persecution by due process of law. Another article would be released on December 10, 1911. In the American Jewish Yearbook, on page 308 of its edition covering the years 1911, on page 191, 308 of its edition, 1911, 1912, I'm sorry. It says Russia has since 1890 adopted a deliberate plan to expel or exterminate 6 million of its people. Did you hear that? Russia plans to exterminate its own people. So if they are Russia's people, how did they become Abraham's seed if they descended from Russia? Because if you understand your Bible, you understand Russian descendants came through Japheth. Abraham's seed came through Shem or Sem, depending on which translation of the Bible you read. You ain't never read in one Bible where Abraham was ever in Russia or Khazaria. Yeah, you can't find Khazaria on a map anymore because it's no longer an actual country to be recognized. But let me get some more of this, what they were promoting. And I'm not going to go through and read every account because there's a whole lot of them. But I'm going to give you quite a few so you can understand that this number, and you know, you've heard me talk about some of these other, when they started and how long they had been promoting this. They had been promoting this almost 100 years before it ever took place in this country around the world, World War II. December 1914, appeal for aid for the Jews. We read about the plight of more than 6 million Jews who lives within the war zone. January 14, 1915, Jews' indifference to the war aid rebuked in support of a fundraising campaign. We are told that more than 6 million Jews are in the very heart of the war zone. February 28, 1916, Schiff gives $25,000 to Immigrant Society, again in connection with an attempt to raise funds. The Times reports that nearly 6 million Jews are ruined. Almost at the end of the war on October 18, 1918, an attempt to get $1 billion from American donors in support of whatever was happening in Russia back then. $1 billion. Do you realize how much $1 billion was 100 years ago? I mean, think about how much it is now. So can you imagine a hustle for $1 billion in the year 1918? I think they had a quote unquote successful revolution there for a change, the Times reported in its subtitle that 6 million souls will need help, without saying what kind of souls they are. But further down, this is then spelled out: 6 million Jews need help. Now, in the middle of the First World War, World War One, the American Jewish Committee, like I said, I guess I should have put a whole bunch of notes in. The American Jewish Committee released the booklet. Now I think it was about 25,000 of them. 25,000 that they sent to American mouthpieces, the president, Woodrow Wilson, I think at the time, and so they sent out these booklets, 25,000 American mouthpieces, the president, and shapers of public opinion. And what was in that booklet was something about 6 million Jews living in squalor and misery, and said a few other things. Let me see. Let me see. Can I find that right quick? Because it was some good stuff in there. Oh yeah, here goes something right here. Okay. Page 19, it talked about 6 million Jews living in squalor and misery. Page 20 stated there are 6 million Jews in Russia, and further below, they live like prison inmates. Page 29, we have again the 6 million Russian Jews. Page 47, 6 million Russian Jews are loyal to their country, and in a similar vein on page 60. And finally on page 66, claiming that nearly half of these 6 million Jews are now without means of support. Now, at the end of World War I, these same folks kind of shifted word. And y'all have heard me mention before, you always have to pay attention to words. That's how you get crossed up. It's kind of like when the pastors in the church start lying to you about giving tithes, and then in the process, they talk about giving like they're the same thing. They're not the same thing. Tithing is food. Giving has a lot of meanings. But your pastors sit there and they play them word games with you. And for some reason, the people in the church pews haven't got their brains smart enough yet to wrap around what the pastors are doing when they're fleecing them like that, when they're lying to them like that. You can't prove, no pastor can sit there and prove, and I've heard many teach on no pastor can prove that tithe was ever money. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm just talking about paying attention to words. So they had been calling themselves Jews all along. And you need to understand, Jew wasn't even a word until 1776, 77, 75, somewhere around in there. Around the same time, the American Revolutionary War took place, and, when they were around there messing with Britain and all that. And so a whole lot of things happened during that period. So y'all need to understand and go study that stuff. But around the end of World War I, they started calling themselves American Hebrews. And they said the crucifixion of Jews must stop. And they said from across the sea, 6 million men and women called to us for help. 6 million famished men and women. 6 million men and women are dying because of this war for democracy. 6 million Jewish men and women are starving across the ocean. This fact that the population of 6 million souls in Ukraine and in Poland have received notice through action and by word that they are going to be completely exterminated. In a New York Times article, July 20th, 1921, And that's amazing. 1921 was the same year they burnt down Tulsa. Check your history on that too and find out who burned down Tulsa, who put the orders in place. Russia's 6 million Jews are facing extermination by massacre. July 20th, 1921. When did they burn down Black Wall Street? Wasn't it the month before? But New York Times, just a month later, coming out saying Russia, 6 million Jews facing extermination by massacre. Black Wall Street burned down. And although history tells you it was 300 got killed, it was more like 3,000. So June, this happened to the people right here in the United States. July, this was supposedly happening to people in another country. And who are we giving sympathy to? We just now starting to recognize what happened on Black Wall Street in 1921, 100 years ago. As the famine is spreading, the counter-revolutionary movement is gaining and the Soviet control is waning. November 12, 1919, an article in the New York Times said about 6 million starving Jews in Europe and about $30 million which have already been spent to help them. $30 million. $30 million given to the Jews. How much money was given to those blacks to rebuild Wall Street? See, we want to sit around here and keep talking about we're a colorblind society, especially with the election of Barack Obama. Well, we ain't too colorblind because Barack Obama didn't have two black parents. See, Barack Obama, white side of the family owned slaves. Barack Obama, black side of the family was slave catchers. Kamala Harris family owned slaves. So neither one of them are from any of the Hebrew tribes, just to let you know that. That's very important when you start studying things. See, y'all think just because black, we same. No. If you read that dictionary, Bible dictionary definition, it said Ham is the progenitor of all the dark races except the Negro. Well, the Negro is the Hebrew. So y'all got to do some research. Y'all got to understand some things. So you got 3 sons from Noah. Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Ham and Shem are the black lions, the black skin. That's why people were always able to leave Israel and go hide in Egypt. Because they shared similar skin tone. But they 2 distinct and different peoples. So, chew on that. So, $30 million already spent to help them. And April 1920, an article came out and they actually messed up and they accidentally said 5 million. And that was starving in Europe. And, I didn't mention it before, but there was a couple other instances back in the 1800s where they also said 5 million on accident. It's kind of like I listened to a speech I did back in 2011 or 2012, and I remember getting an invitation to come speak to the organization, but I had no clue what I talked about, and it was on this channel in the beginning, and I ended up deleting it because it was just a recording. I didn't record the audience, and I didn't have the camera on myself. I just kind of had the camera sitting on the stand where I was talking, so the video wasn't good. The audio was very clear, but the video wasn't good, so I just took it off the channel, and I try to make copies of all my speeches, and I actually came across it the other day, and like I said, I had forgotten what I'd said, and I heard something in there, and I was talking about the General Education Board being founded in 1901, started in 1901, and I know in some other videos I've actually said the General Education Board was founded and started in 1902. So you can get kind of lost. Even though you say numbers so long, you get in a moment of speaking or writing or something, and you can kind of lose track. And, even when I went and edited my book, when I submitted it, but hey, what do I know to the publisher? Because I wrote everything on my own, and then they sent it back for me to proofread the corrections. I missed it, and the publisher missed it. But a good friend of mine that read the book, he called me and said, "Hey, man, on such and such page, it's a couple of pages." He said, based on what you're writing, he said, the reader will know what you're talking about. He said, but I just wanted to point it out. And I said, man, that's, kind of what happens when you've spent all the time writing the book and then you the one proofreading the book, because I actually asked a few people, with some chapters to go through and read and just try to point some things out. And, and one guy, he sat on it for several days and then came back and gave me the information I had already found. And I'm like, well, you call yourself my friend, but I don't dwell on that. So that's why I said I just got on that tangent because people can make mistakes when they're talking about numbers. And so May 1920, there was another article by the Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, and they asking for big dollars. They asked for big dollars to make sure that 6 million lives are no longer at stake. There's several more articles listing the 6 million, but you get the picture that was painted long before World War II, hopefully by now. I hope I'm giving you enough information where you can say, hey, maybe I need to go research this a little bit so I can find out what really happened. Because there were several political parties that had actually been formed trying to stop slavery before the Republican Party was formed, but each one of them had actually failed. And this time, the upcoming party had the necessary support behind it to finally be formed and actually last. So it was a challenge and a threat to the slaveholder party. And for some reason today, we're still beholden to the slave master party, even though we came from under their yoke in 1860. We came from under their yoke politically in 1860. They wouldn't even let us in a convention until 1924. They didn't even get the first black politician on at any level until 1934. And even the Democratic Convention in 1924 was called the Klan Bait Convention because there was so many members of the KKK there. They call it the Klan Bait Convention, and that was the first one they let blacks attend. You don't think they had something in mind? But the Republican Party was the first party to threaten what the slaveholding party was doing. And right today, like I said, the slaveholders are still running the party. But in reality, they're running both parties now. I know some folks, they staunch Democrats. I know folks that are staunch Republican, and I'm a staunch non-participant because I keep studying. And the more I study, the more I say I'll probably never go into a voting booth again. Ever. I haven't voted for a major candidate since 2004. When I voted in 2008 for president, I wrote in Alan Keyes. He was on the ballot too, but you still had to write him in because it wasn't a major ballot. You even had Cynthia McKinney on there, another black person. But did y'all even know that? No, because your slave master told you what black person you needed to vote for. So the slaveholders are great at what they do. They use the Democrats to keep blacks enslaved, and they use the Republicans to enslave everybody else. Now, as black Hebrews, we have constantly been told to get over the slavery issue because that was so long ago. Well, if we had been treated fairly in the process of freedom and emancipation, we might be better able to move ahead. Why are we told to get over an event that happened so long ago, but every other ethnic group is allowed to never forget the atrocities that happened to their ancestors? White folks tell us we weren't slaves and they didn't own slaves, so there's no need to keep the issue at the forefront if you're black. But amazing, some of these same white folks who had nothing to do with the Holocaust are prone to make sure they keep bringing it up because we must never forget the evil done to those people. Well, how can you not be a participant in one historic event and say get over it and let's move on? And on the other hand, you were not a participant in another historical event, but you want to make sure everybody else feels sympathy for these people. You can't have it both ways. The book of James says a double-minded person is unstable in all his ways. You know, many people want to say these folks came out of bondage in Egypt and they still managed to come up economically. Many of the people promoting it that have no understanding of the very Bible that they are reading. That Bible said Israelites and Hebrews look the same as Egyptians, who are dark-skinned people. And if you don't believe that, go get Richard Poe book. I can't even think of the name of the book right now by Richard Poe. I read so many, I get lost in the thoughts of the process. But Richard Poe has a book, and I think it's the only book that's on a book list if you want to understand what color the original Egyptians were. Don't take my word for nothing. And Richard Poe ain't black. But they want to say these folks came out of bondage in the middle of the 20th century and got on top economically despite the treatment. Well, I also believe that at one time. But they've been hustling countries for reparations since that time, and they still receive reparations right today. Study it for yourself. I've even had people tell me they came out of bondage in Egypt and they still managed to come up economically. Israelites and Hebrews look like Egyptians. First, they tried to tell us Israel was white. Then they said some of Israel was white and some was black. Then they admitted Israel, Judah, Benjamin, Gad, and as well as the other brothers were all black. Sure, there's been intermingling. You know, and I told you about what happened on the slave ship, but that stuff went along and across all tribes. You know, you think about back when Miriam and Aaron kind of chastised Moses for marrying a woman, and your pastors told you for years that Miriam and Aaron was mad at Moses for marrying that black woman. No, your pastors ain't read the Bible right. They were chastising Moses because Moses was from a different tribe of the woman he took to be his wife. Go study that. And so there has been intermingling because the tribes did move around. Where do you think your Native Americans came from? See, you weren't taught how people got to the United States, Canada, South America before the slave ships. They walked. Not all at one time, over generations. They walked. Earth ain't a globe. Earth is flat. But I'm not here to talk about that. So intermingling's been going on forever. But identity still comes from the father. The people of the 6 million say identity comes from the mother and their culture. You see, we look at today's Egyptians and think that's what Egypt looked like back then. Have you seen the hieroglyphs and carvings on the walls? And what color are those people? What features do those images show? They show the exact same features that black people have today. So if these people were white in appearance, why would they leave their history with images of another people? And by the way, today's Egyptians are actually Turkish descendants left over from the Ottoman War. Now, in the book of John, which the 6 million actually tried to have removed from the Bible some years ago, the 6 million told Yeshua that they were never in bondage to any man. So think about all that stuff I read you earlier about their persecution, about their slavery, about their imprisonment. But then in John chapter 8, they said they were never in bondage to any man. And I know some of you say, well, the book of John was written before that period. Well, I'm going to get into a little bit of that before I close out. Because if they were never in bondage, even leading up to John 8, how were they the people of slavery in Egypt, Christian? Come on, Bible scholars. Tell me. Tell me. How were they the people in bondage in Egypt if they said, we ain't never been in bondage to any man? And see, we were also led to believe that the slavery spoke of in Deuteronomy was the one that was related to the book of Exodus. Well, in every Bible I done picked up, Exodus comes before Deuteronomy. So how could that slavery be the same one as in Deuteronomy? Because Deuteronomy was a slavery that took place after the Exodus out of Egypt. Now, the only book that actually came before Genesis or Exodus in the Bible is actually the book of Job. Job is the very first written book of the Bible. But for whatever reason, they put it where it is. And, my studies showed the reason it was put there is because if you read the book of Job, it doesn't fit with any of the other books in the chronologic stuff and all that stuff like that. So Job seemed kind of out of place. But seeing that Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy, happened in a different place and time, you have to go ahead and go forward and read the book of Luke, chapter 21, verse 24. And let me pull it up right quick. In Luke 21:24, this is what it says. Some of the people will be killed by soldiers. Others will be made prisoners and taken to all different countries. The holy city of Jerusalem will be under the control of foreigners until their time is completed. Now, depending on which translation you read, it says the time of the Gentiles being fulfilled. Okay, so I don't want to confuse you. And so this is what Jesus was saying in Luke. Jesus was talking about a future slavery, not the one in Exodus. Jesus was talking about a slavery that was still coming. So, how did a land get returned to a people that it never belonged to? The Bible never said the land would be returned to his descendants by any U.S. president or any declaration by the British. And in the book of Joshua, chapter 1 and 6, it says, be strong and courageous, because you will divide this land among these people, this land which I swore to their fathers that I would give to this people. In Acts chapter 7, verses 6 and 7, it says, God spoke to him in this way. For 400 years, your descendants will be strangers in a country that is not their own, and they will be enslaved and mistreated. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves. God said, and afterward they will come out of that country and worship me in this place. Now, what do we see going on in modern day spiritual Egypt? We're not in physical Egypt anymore. We're in spiritual Egypt. America is spiritual Egypt because Egypt's definition, Hebrew meaning, is the land of bondage. Well, where were Judah and Israel taken for a new bondage? America. So America and Egypt are the same thing, just different periods in time. So there are many more verses relating to this. I just wanted to give you one from the Old Covenant and one from the New Covenant to show you it's not just old Bible days talking. And by the way, stop saying back in the Bible, in the biblical days, because we're living in biblical days. God said he was going to give the land back. But in 1948, Harry Truman said, God taking too long. So he gave the wrong people the rights to the land. that they had already planned on stealing almost 100 years before, if not longer. I was just able to go back and find information from 1850. It might have been going on a lot longer than that. But, I doubt it because, like I said, they did have their own land at one point. And so far, up to date, they've been kicked out 134, 138 countries, whatever I said earlier. I haven't looked at it in a while. And so Harry Truman gave them the land in 1948. Then Donald Trump came along and made Jerusalem the capital while he was in office. Did you see where God said either of these men had that authority to do that? But I saw a lot of pastors applauding this, and some even applauded what Truman did back in 1948, right today. I'll give you one more verse before I close out, because I'm almost done. In Jeremiah 30:3, it says, "For behold, days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will restore the fortunes of my people, Israel and Judah. The Lord says, I will also bring them back to the land that I gave to their forefathers, and they shall possess it." So, how could the land in Israel belong to a people who came from a country called Khazaria, which is a part of modern day Russia? And to solidify the number, one of the people of the six mentality produced a TV show called The $6 Million Man. I mean, why not make it a $10 million man since he was a prototype? But why did the number 6 million have to be used? I mean, I just gave you something to think about. I'm not trying to promote any hate, but we need to understand what's going on, why black people are still treated the way they're treated, why Jewish people are treated the way they're treated and revered above everybody else as the great economists ever, the greatest businessman ever. You gonna still sit here and say that about a lot of them when you look at the way they got their wealth by enslaving your ancestors? You gonna praise that? Go back and go look at some of these companies that have ties and went and bought some of these older companies that dealt in slave dealings, clothing, railroad systems, banks putting up, slave owners using their slaves as collateral for the banks and all of that stuff. I mean, you gonna sit there and keep believing in that? These lies we've been told all these years? Like I said, I know they're not all like that. No race has all good people. No race has all bad people. No culture, ethnicity, or anything has all good people or all bad people. And I've had people tell me, you got some Orthodox Jews, and so they believe in Christ and all that. That's all fine and dandy, and they probably do, and are probably sincere in their beliefs. But not one time have you found any of those Orthodox giving up their privilege. So you can say you're a true follower of Christ, but you won't give up your privilege. Now, does that make sense? Because I think the word says you have to give up yourself and follow me. So if you don't want to give up your privilege, you refuse to give up your privilege, but you're saying you're following Christ, somebody lie you. And so, I mean, it's troubling, the things that I research. And I really didn't even want to do this, but the lady that I know, like I said, I respect her, but it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I just wanted to put that out because we're still going to hear from the pulpit, we're still going to hear from the textbooks that we need to be sympathetic. And I know a few years back, one of the school districts, somewhere might have been here in Texas, were trying to wipe the whole slave narrative out of all the textbooks. But they didn't wipe out the Holocaust narrative. They didn't wipe out the internment of the Japanese during World War II. But let's wipe out the slave narrative. See, that goes back to something else in the Bible. I think Psalm 83:4. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going from memory. Said all the nations got together and said, "Let us wipe off the memory of Israel, so they won't ever be remembered and recognized as a people anymore." I'm paraphrasing. I think that's in Psalm 83:4. So why is everybody working so hard to get rid of the name Israel? The real Israel, the true Israel, the biblical Israel. Because black Hebrews are still Israel. And I've seen a lot of pastors, websites, blogs, and all that. They say all the true Hebrews are dead. So you telling me none of those Hebrews had children, and their children had children, and their children had children? That's what they telling us. So that's just saying your grandmother and grandfather don't exist. Your great grandparents don't exist. Your great 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 grandparents don't exist. All the way back to that line, that biblical lineage of the 12. If we're going to listen to these pastors. And like I said, the more pastors talk now, the less I want to go back into a church. The more they talk, the less I want to go back into a church. And I'm not saying I'm above anything. I'm just saying you can't keep sitting in that pulpit teaching these lies and think I'm going to listen to you. I don't care how much I respect you. Once, and there's nobody I agree with everything on, especially my understanding of the Bible. I don't expect my wife to agree with me on everything in the Bible. That's why we talk about the Bible all the time. But we're two different people. So we should think differently on some things. Our understanding should be different on some things. But the core values of the Bible, me and my wife think the same way. And so these pastors will sit there and keep promoting this stuff. And all that tells me is they really don't know their Bible. But we sit there and listen to them because they went to seminary. Sorry about that. Seminary. And we keep listening to them. Pastors have told me, we don't get into that skin color in the Bible, Brother Meyer. But then they turn around and say, well, these people doing so well economically. God's blessing them. God's protecting their land over there. God protecting that land over there for the people it really belong to. He ain't protecting it for them. He's protecting it for his children, bringing his children back home. He said he gonna gather them. Didn't he say he gonna gather them in Jehoshaphat? At Jehoshaphat? And he gonna plead for his people? That's what God said. Myron didn't say that. So we got some flawed theology somewhere. Somewhere we got some flawed theology. So is it coming from people like me? Or is it coming from seminary, which is financed by the people I've been talking about? I mean, you figured it out. People I'm talking about on the printing press back in the day. So, and you might want to know some of these same people used to be a lot of your Catholic popes and priests. But people want to get upset with me. Hey, the information is available. Don't take nothing I say as the truth. Nothing. Don't take nothing. Go do your research. I mean, when I started the channel, I would try to interact with people and reply to comments and all that. That got old real fast. So, YouTube has dropped my channels down. They don't promote my videos anymore. So, whatever. I put the information out there for those who want to listen and go do their own research. That's it. So, we right at an hour. So, I'm gonna shut this off and let you know that I shared the information because I love you guys. I share the information because we've gotten so much bad information over the years. So have a great day, and I will talk to you next time.